The project closed at 3 million. Victor's voice cut through the boardroom like ice. Applause erupted. Everyone clapped, smiling, except me. Because while they celebrated, I realized something chilling. My name wasn't mentioned once, and I was the one who built that deal from nothing. Let me take you back to where this started. Before the betrayal, before the boardroom silence, and long before I understood just how disposable loyalty could be. My name is Samantha Rhodes, and I've been a senior project director at Norview Technologies for 12 years. Not flashy, not political. I've always let my work speak for itself. And it did. Quietly, consistently, successfully. The green energy platform deal had been my baby from the beginning. 11 months of meetings, sleepless nights, and impossible negotiations. There were weeks when I worked 18-hour days, missed dinner with my daughter, even canceled a vacation I hadn't taken in 5 years just to finalize a prototype for our biggest prospect. It wasn't just a project to me. It was a personal triumph. One I thought would finally be acknowledged. That's why I wore that pen to the meeting. It's a silver fountain pen, smooth, old-fashioned, a little scratched. My husband gave it to me on the day I got my first promotion. Use it when you sign something that matters, he'd said, 20 years ago. I had planned to use it today. I'd imagined Victor handing me a contract bonus, or at least a recognition letter. Something symbolic, something real. Instead, I sat there while Victor Crane, our newly hired CEO, soaked in the praise and ran his fingers through his $300 haircut. The contract had been signed, the project approved, the client delighted. But in every word he spoke, I didn't exist. And then came the dagger. Victor smiled and gestured to his right. We'll be moving forward under the guidance of Eva Lansing, our new associate director. Eva, the same Eva who had joined us 3 weeks ago. Young, blonde, impeccably dressed, with no experience in green tech. But, as I had started to suspect, a long and complicated history with Victor, one that had nothing to do with clean energy. She smiled like a woman who'd won something. I smiled too, but mine wasn't real. I could feel my palms grow cold beneath the table. I clenched the pen inside my purse like it was the only thing anchoring me to the moment. Because what was happening wasn't just an oversight. It was a surgical erasure. I was being cut out, completely and deliberately. I didn't speak during the meeting. Not because I was weak, but because I knew something Victor didn't. Clients don't fall in love with spreadsheets or titles. They fall in love with people, with trust, with time. And I had been the one they trusted. When the meeting ended, I walked quietly back to my office. Not defeated, but alert. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to protest. I was going to watch. I was going to wait. And then I was going to remind them all, what happens when you cut out the heartbeat of a deal and think the machine will still run? I sat alone in my office for a long time after that meeting. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the pen in my hand. This little piece of metal that had once meant progress, respect, and growth. Now, it felt like a relic from a different lifetime. There was no official email, no written announcement, just a quiet wave of whispers that spread through the floor by mid-afternoon. Eva was the new face of the Green Spring Project. And I was no longer anything at all. I kept working that day, answering emails, finalizing deliverables. I did it not because I owed them, but because I needed time. Time to understand how far this betrayal reached, and more importantly, who was part of it. That evening, I requested a meeting with HR. Not formally, just a coffee chat with Diane, someone I'd mentored years ago. She looked uncomfortable, hesitant. Samantha, she said gently, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but Victor's been pushing restructuring since his first week. He's looking for a younger strategic vision. His words. I raised an eyebrow. So this wasn't about my performance? She bit her lip. He's calling it realignment of leadership. And well, he's making sure the budget reflects that, including incentive redistribution. Incentive redistribution. That was code for cutting me out of the profit pool. I nodded slowly. And the Greenspring deal? She sighed. He's trying to categorize it as a team effort, no individual bonuses. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about sidelining me. It was about erasing my ownership. He didn't want to reward the person who made the deal happen. He wanted to rewrite history, one where he and Eva appeared as the masterminds. That night I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that holds 1,000 unsaid things. My daughter Chloe had waited up for me. She was 19, blunt and smarter than I ever gave her credit for. "You look like someone stole your thunder," she said, handing me a cup of tea. I gave her a half smile. "They tried." She paused, watching me. "Let me guess. Your new boss took credit for your work, and some Barbie in heels got the spotlight." I blinked. "How did you—" "Mom, it's corporate. It's always like that." I laughed, the sound bitter in my own ears. But she wasn't wrong. Still, I wasn't ready to become a cautionary tale. The next morning, I got in early. I reread every clause in my original contract. I checked my email logs with the client. I documented timelines. I even printed out copies of all my meeting notes, because if they wanted a paper trail, they were going to get one. What Victor hadn't considered was that people like me don't just walk away. We watch, we listen, and when the moment is right, we act. That afternoon, as I was organizing files, my phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen, the last name I expected. Ellen Myers, Senior VP of Strategic Development at Core Unity. The client, the $3 million client. I picked up the call. Her voice was low, measured. "Hi, Samantha. I just received a confusing update from your company. It says you're no longer on the project." "Is that true?" I froze. My fingers gripped the pen again. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's true." A pause. "Well, I have a problem with that. I think you and I should talk, privately." I met Ellen Myers the following morning at a quiet little cafe near her office, a place she chose deliberately, away from boardrooms and buzzwords. I arrived 10 minutes early, out of habit. She arrived 5 minutes early, out of intent. "Samantha," she said warmly, sliding into the booth across from me. "I'm so glad you agreed to meet." "So am I," I replied, though the knot in my stomach hadn't untangled since she called. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need to ask you something directly," she said, leaning in. "Did you step away from the Greenspring project voluntarily?" I shook my head. "No, I was replaced." "Why?" I hesitated. There was no elegant way to say it. "Because I'm not part of the narrative Victor Crane wants to sell." She exhaled sharply. "That's what I thought." What she said next nearly made me drop my coffee. "We signed that deal because of you. You built the trust. You solved the prototype issue. You even flew to Denver last minute to calm down our compliance team. Victor, Eva, they weren't in the room when it mattered." I blinked, stunned. That trip to Denver had nearly cost me my health. I'd had a fever. I'd taken 2 Tylenols and powered through. Now hearing her say that, it was overwhelming. Too much. Too unexpected. "I'm not just angry," Ellen continued. "I'm insulted. They sent me a new liaison this week, Eva. She didn't know basic figures. She couldn't explain the timeline. She smiled a lot and threw around buzzwords like synergy and vertical integration, as if that would make up for her ignorance." I couldn't help it. I let out a small, breathy laugh. "That sounds exactly right." Ellen's face softened. "I've seen this before. Powerful women who do the heavy lifting, only to be swept aside when it's time to cut the ribbon. It's insulting and exhausting." Her words hit deeper than I expected, because she was right. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us who had been told to make space when the reward came around. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from shame, but from a slow, simmering anger that finally had clarity. "So what now?" I asked, my voice steady. Ellen leaned back and folded her arms. "I want to offer you something, not out of pity, because I'm a businesswoman first. I want someone competent, committed, and who knows my company inside and out." She paused. "I want you to come on as an independent advisor, directly to us. You'd work with our internal integration team, same compensation package, possibly more." I stared at her. Independent? Not through Norview? That wasn't just a job offer. That was a shift in power. I began, but she held up a hand. "Take a few days. I know this isn't easy." But Victor made a mistake. He underestimated how loyal clients are when they're treated with respect. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ellen. Really, that means more than I can say." We stood up to leave, and she squeezed my arm gently. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply being seen. As I walked back to my car, my mind spun. The bitterness from the boardroom, the insult of being replaced, the sleepless nights, they all began to sharpen into something new. Resolve. I pulled out my phone and sat in the driver's seat for a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I smiled, for the first time in days. That night, I opened my laptop and created a private folder titled Plan B. I reviewed every contact I had from the Green Spring project. Every email, timeline, deliverable. I compiled them into a timeline that made one thing painfully clear. I had been the backbone of the deal. They didn't just try to push me out. They tried to rewrite the truth. And that, more than anything, lit the fire inside me. The next morning, Eva strutted past my office in a pencil skirt too tight for comfort, and a confidence that wasn't hers. She glanced in at me like I was yesterday's news. Oh, how wrong she was. I picked up the phone and dialed one more number. Not to Ellen, to someone else. To someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who owed me a favor. And just like that, the next piece of my quiet little war fell into place. The number I dialed belonged to Naomi Trask, an old colleague from my early consulting years. She was now the senior compliance officer at Elridge Capital, one of Norview's largest financial backers. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years, not since we'd both fought tooth and nail to prevent a merger that would have buried dozens of mid-level jobs. She won. I lost. But we respected each other for how we played the game. Now I needed her. She picked up on the third ring. "Samantha?" "Hi, Naomi. I need 15 minutes and your discretion." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "You never call unless something's on fire." "I'm listening." I laid it out, clean and simple. No drama, just facts. The project, the removal, the blatant attempt to reassign credit, and the most important detail of all, the client's growing frustration. "You're telling me Norview's about to jeopardize a $3 million rollout with Core Unity because they pushed out the deal lead to install what? A LinkedIn model with no credentials?" "That's the short version," I said, lips tight. She let out a sharp breath. "Wow, that's not just reckless. That's suicidal." Exactly. Naomi didn't offer me a solution, but she didn't need to. I knew how the world she lived in worked. She only had to ask the right questions during her next financial review call with Norview's board. And knowing Naomi, she would. After we hung up, I sat back and closed my eyes. God, it felt good to move again. Not in bitterness, but in strategy. The next 2 days were quiet, almost eerily so. I went through the motions at work while tracking the slow burn I'd just ignited. Then, on Wednesday morning, it happened. Victor canceled our department's weekly check-in. No explanation, just a one-line email sent at 6:07 a.m. "Team, this week's check-in is postponed. We'll reschedule." Postponed? That never happened. Victor loved those meetings. They were his personal stage. Something was rattling him. That same day, Diane from HR pinged me with a cryptic message. "Something's up. Naomi's name came up in the boardroom this morning. You didn't hear it from me." I smiled at the screen, too pleased, too satisfied. So soon? I hadn't expected the dominoes to fall this quickly. But then came the part that infuriated me. That afternoon, I received a forwarded email, sent company-wide. Eva had been appointed Strategic Vision Liaison for the Green Spring Project. A made-up title if I'd ever seen one. The announcement praised her for her energy, her fresh perspective, and, this one really burned, her deep involvement since the project's inception. What? Since the inception? She'd been there 3 weeks. I closed the email and stared at the wall for a long moment. Too much, too fast, too insulting. I'd played the long game until now. But this was rewriting history in real time. Fine. If they wanted a story, I'd give them one. That night I wrote a short, polite email to Ellen Myers. Just one sentence. You might want to take a closer look at today's company announcement regarding Greenspring, specifically the credentials of their new liaison. Then I sent a second email, not to a client, to a friend I'd once helped prep for a panel at the Wall Street Journal's Women in Tech conference, who now happened to work in PR for one of the most watched B2B tech newsletters in the country. Because if Norview wanted visibility, I was going to give it to them. On my terms. By Friday morning, the ripple had become a wave. I woke to 3 new messages, 2 from former colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months, and 1 from Ellen Myers. Hers was brief, but direct. "Thank you. I'll handle it from here." And handle it she did. By 11 a.m., Norview's executive floor was in chaos. Word had gotten around that Ellen had requested a full audit of the Greenspring engagement, specifically asking for the credentials and involvement timeline of the newly appointed liaison, Eva Lansing. She had copied 2 partners, 3 attorneys, and, most damning of all, their procurement integrity officer. Victor's carefully crafted illusion was unraveling, one email thread at a time. Meanwhile, Naomi had done her part too. Elridge Capital scheduled an emergency performance risk evaluation call with Norview's board. And though I didn't hear it firsthand, Diane messaged me afterward. Victor looked like someone had poured cold coffee down his suit. Too perfect. That afternoon, I stepped out for air, walking past the break room just in time to hear Eva's voice. Sharp, flustered, defensive. "They're coming after me like I did something wrong." I didn't lie. Victor told me to say I'd been part of it from the beginning. A beat, then silence. "Too late, Eva. You played dress-up in someone else's role, and the costume never fit." I walked by without a word, but oh, how satisfying it was to witness the beginning of the end. But the real thunderclap came not from a boardroom, but from a blog. The newsletter my PR contact worked for, Tech Pulse Strategy Weekly, ran a story on invisible architects in tech projects. The centerpiece of the article? An anonymous source describes being replaced at the height of a multi-million-dollar contract by someone with the right look but none of the qualifications. The client refused to cooperate unless the original lead was reinstated. The article ends with a quote, "Corporate memory is short, but clients remember who shows up for the hard parts." My phone buzzed nonstop for hours. The piece went semi-viral on LinkedIn. Comments poured in, stories like mine, frustrations from other women, and even support from former clients who recognized the tone of what had been done to me and had likely experienced it too. Too real, too common, too powerful to ignore. Later that evening, Chloe found me at the kitchen table, still scrolling. "Mom," she said, grinning, "you broke LinkedIn." I laughed, really laughed. For the first time in weeks, I felt light, like I had taken back something no one else could have handed to me, my own narrative. But with every move forward, there's always a reaction. Monday morning brought a calendar invite. Urgent, Victor Crane. 10 o'clock a.m., executive conference room. No details, No agenda, just tension. I walked in calmly, wearing the same navy blue blazer I'd worn the day I closed Greenspring. Victor was already seated, flanked by two board members, and, surprise, surprise, Eva. She looked like she hadn't slept. Victor didn't waste time. Samantha, we're concerned about certain perceptions regarding recent events. It would be in everyone's best interest to clear the air. I smiled politely. Happy to help. Which part would you like me to clarify? The project I led? Or the silence I kept while others took credit? A pause. A twitch in his jaw. Eva looked like she wanted to disappear. One board member, an older gentleman I didn't recognize well, leaned forward. Miss Rhodes, would you be open to sharing your documentation of involvement in the Greenspring deal? Would I? I already had it printed, tabbed, and waiting in my briefcase. I pulled it out and handed it over without hesitation. Of course, I said. Transparency is in everyone's best interest. The board member flipped through my documentation with practiced eyes. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The timeline was too detailed, the emails too clear, the truth too undeniable. Victor sat stiffly across the table, his fingers laced together, his jaw tight. Eva didn't look up once. I kept my voice calm. Every meeting, every draft, every client call, I logged it all. I don't say that to boast. I say it because this wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. I was removed with intention. There was a long silence. Then the board member looked at Victor. Why were these records not disclosed when we asked for project leadership verification last week? Victor cleared his throat. We were still reviewing the structure. A laugh nearly escaped me. Reviewing the structure? That was corporate speak for we were hoping no one would check. But they had. And now it was too late. Another board member, a woman I'd once briefly worked with on a separate initiative, spoke next. Victor, were you aware of Eva's lack of credentials prior to assigning her to lead Greenspring? He hesitated. She's learning, and her perspective brings energy we were missing. That was it. The boardroom went still. Cold. Too much. Too tone-deaf. Too dismissive. And then the older gentleman turned to me. So, Rhodes, if we were to formally reappoint you to the Greenspring contract as the project's strategic lead, would you accept? My chest tightened, not from fear but from surprise. After everything, they were offering it back? I took a breath. No, I said gently. The client has already asked me to work directly with them. And frankly, I intend to honor that. I'm not interested in a seat that was only offered after public pressure made silence impossible. That landed like a crack of thunder in the room. Victor's face turned red. But, I continued, I'm willing to support the transition on my terms to ensure the project's success, because I care about the outcome more than the optics. That part was true. Always had been. The board members exchanged a look. Then one of them nodded. We respect that, Ms. Rhodes, and we thank you for your integrity. We'll be initiating an internal review of executive project assignments, effective immediately. Translation: Victor was on thin ice. As I stood to leave, Eva finally looked up. There was something in her eyes, regret maybe, or just the shock of having the facade stripped away. Either way, it was too little, too late. I left the boardroom feeling lighter, not vindictive, not triumphant, just clear. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged, I hadn't played dirty. I had simply told the truth and waited for it to do what truth always does when given room. Expose. Correct. Rebalance. That evening, Ellen called. You handled that beautifully, she said. Did I? I asked. Oh, yes. Quiet power is still power, Samantha. I smiled, and for the first time, I believed it. 2 weeks later, I walked into Core Unity's downtown office, not as a vendor, not as a desperate employee hoping to reclaim a stolen seat, but as a trusted advisor with a contract that bore only one name at the top, mine. There was no fanfare, no red carpet, Just quiet recognition and a new desk near the window overlooking the skyline. It was more than enough. Ellen greeted me with a knowing smile. "This feels right," she said, handing me a welcome folder. "It always should have been this way." I nodded. It just took the long way around. The first days were steady, honest, productive. I met with engineers, marketing leads, and finance. Not once did I need to assert authority. They listened because they remembered. They trusted me because I had earned that trust, not demanded it. Back at Norview, the aftermath continued. Victor was transitioned out with a vague press release full of corporate euphemisms. Eva quietly resigned a few days later. No one was surprised. Diane from HR sent me a note. "They thought you'd disappear quietly. Instead, you stood still and let the truth echo." That line stayed with me. Because I hadn't gone to war. I hadn't shouted, threatened, or burned bridges. I had simply refused to be erased. One afternoon, as I left a team session, a junior analyst approached me, early 20s, nervous, eyes full of admiration. "I read that Tech Pulse article. I think it was about you. If it wasn't, it still felt like it was." I smiled. Maybe it was. Maybe it was about all of us. She nodded. "I just wanted to say, it gave me courage." That moment meant more than any title ever had. I had always believed that loyalty mattered, that showing up every day and doing the works was enough. But sometimes, silence isn't strength, it's permission. And when the system is built to silence the right voices, refusing to disappear becomes the most radical act of all. Message and call to action. 100 words. Samantha's story is a reminder that not all victories are loud, and not all power wears a suit. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is hold your ground when someone tries to push you out of your own legacy. Have you ever been sidelined for something you built? Has your quiet effort ever been taken for granted, or worse, rewritten by someone louder but less deserving? We'd love to hear your story, because somewhere out there, someone else needs to know they're not alone. Share your experience in the comments, and let's make sure quiet strength is never mistaken for weakness again.